Contemplationist Insight, a Simon Vumbaca podcast.
Hi, Contemplationist. Today's podcast will sit within the accountability series. Today we're going to be talking about the real cost of learning a lesson. It is said that Errare humanum est. To make mistakes is human, a very well-known statement that has been used in all sorts of instances to express that errors do happen and can happen. The reason errors occur can relate to many things, depending on each specific case. A world without errors would be a world ruled by a lack of initiative, as only when we venture into new things do we discover what not to do and ultimately what works. In fact, one could even say that the problem with the current trend of artificial intelligence is that we tend to focus on the outcome as something that is right. But anyway, that's a discussion for another time. To learn from errors require understanding their origin. And the tendency is to focus on whatever the error is linked to, our action or not. In other words, who is in charge, why the error occur. In a study published in 2023 by the University of Iowa, the conclusion was that if human error is the reason for the outcome, the brain remains active for an additional 2 to 3 seconds. That means the brain realizes a mistake was made and essentially wants to learn from it. We learn from a mistake in the hope of avoiding it in the future. This may sound obvious to many, but actually, is it really? Our brain, it seems, has a very expedited manner of dealing with and learning from mistakes. I don't know about you, but to me, that process seems to take far longer than just a few seconds. When an error occurs, the difference between an error and a different outcome will not be detailed here, because I think that's the purpose and the subject of a separate conversation. However, we need to learn why the error happened and what are the consequences of that error. When this is not understood, the blame game starts, and finding fault in others is often preferred to accepting one's own. In essence, when an error is detected, the instinct is identify the cause, and that is the essential first step. However, if the focus ends there, we are not learning all there is to learn from it. But wait, the value of learning your lesson is clear. Now, what about the cost of error? Very different. The real cost is obviously variable, depending on each error and its own instances. However, there are some common points that can be considered to estimate the real cost of an error. Of course, there is the obvious financial cost. This is the most logical to measure. Sometimes learning a lesson involves a direct financial impact, a poor investment, a poor decision, missing deadline, a change in taxation, implementing the wrong strategy, an increase in the cost of components, and many other that can be named, can all have a serious financial implication. But are these real errors? Well, we should have preempted it. We should have thought we should. But ultimately, the financial cost of that misjudgment or error is very clear. But there is also the time cost. Learning a lesson involves a significant investment of time to understand, correct, and hopefully put in place the right step to avoid reproducing future errors. That is far longer than the 2 to 3 seconds that the University of Iowa tell us our brain requires. Emotional cost. The emotional cost of learning a lesson can be substantial. It may involve stress, frustration, trauma, tension, disappointment, and possibly a loss of confidence. Opportunity costs are also not to be forgotten. How much potential opportunity are we missing out on because of that error? For instance, selling some reserves to cover up an error means depleting the resources available for opportunistic investment. Sometimes, as a company, for example, you do make a mistake in your investment. That means that you do not have cash, and to save your face and to try to save the investment, you're going to throw even more money at it when in fact you knew that the best thing to do would have been to call it a day very soon in the process. And what about the reputation cost? Well, of course there is a reputation cost to an error. Learning a lesson might come with a cost of damaging reputation. Mistakes, failures can affect how others perceive what we achieve. That can have a long-term consequences that are often overlooked. For example, if you make a mistake, you will always be referred to as that entity that made that mistake, because that's what people's brains will highlight in terms of avoiding to deal with you because, or just in case that is to happen again. So, in essence, not learning from one mistake has a heavy immediate and midterm cost. Not learning from one mistake is also an immense loss of value. Hence, the second and often overlooked part of the quote, Errare humanum est. The second part of the quote is preservare autum diabolicum, which basically means that to preserve and persevere in the error is diabolical. The second part is far more relevant to today's world, in my opinion, than the first part. I have been Simon Vumbaca, your Contemplationist.